Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on another session of We Connect Academy Learning from Women Leaders Around the World series. My name is Andrea, and today I am very happy to introduce Jude Jennison. She is the founder of Leaders by Nature and author of the book Leading Through Uncertainty, a book based on interviews with CEOs as well as her findings from working with over 3,000 leaders. Leaders by Nature is a certified women owned business in the UK, and in her company, Jude develops executive teams to lead disruptive change with less stress. She works with a herd of horses to transform leadership and team behavior and gets rapid results, including an SME who grew from 9 to 38 employees in 15 months, a large recruitment company who turned a loss-making division into a profit in 3 months, and an entrepreneur who made a breakthrough with sales, doubling her business in 6 months. Isn't that amazing? Today, she will talk about how to lead a team through uncertainty. I'll let Jude introduce herself, but I would like to remind all attendees that you're in listen only mode. So if you have any questions, please write them down in the Q&A box on the GoToWebinar control panel at the right side of your screen. We will make sure to read all the questions out loud once the webinar is completed. The recording of this webinar will be available after today's session, and it will be emailed to all attendees, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel. If you don't follow us on YouTube yet, please find us under the name of We Connect International. Thank you for being here with us today, Jude. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for that warm welcome, and welcome everybody wherever you are in the world today. As Andrea says, this is a session on leading through uncertainty, and I think we're all experts in this right now. We've all spent the last 6 months leading through uncertainty. In fact, longer than that. We've led through uncertainty all of our lives. But what I realized more recently is that whilst I thrive on uncertainty most of the time and not all of the time, I realized that a lot of other people felt uncomfortable with it. And that's really why I wrote the book. I began my career working for IBM in the UK. And when I joined the company in the early 1990s, I was one of only a handful of women in the office, in an office of about 1,500 men. And so I realized quite early on in my career that I was different from the people that were around me. And the other thing that was different about me was that I did a degree in French, and pretty much everyone around me had a degree in science or maths. So really early on in my career, I realized that I was going to do things differently and to learn to be okay with that. And what that meant was that I created a career out of not being the most technical person in the company, in fact, probably one of the least technical people in the company. But I carved a career out of being given things that nobody knew how to do, but they would, so I would define my own objectives, develop my own team and execute. And in hindsight, I realized that is leading through uncertainty. But at the time, I thought it was easy because it meant I could make it up as I went along. And so I've developed that ability to make it up as I go along, or lead through uncertainty, whichever way you want to call it. I've developed that throughout my career. But when I left IBM in 2010, I set up a leadership and development and coaching business. And at the time, I was terrified of horses. And I decided I didn't want to be frightened of anything. So in the process of overcoming my fear of horses, I learned the way of working with them called equine facilitated leadership. And it's a way of working with horses on the ground without riding them to explore non-verbal behavior. And if you think about it, so the clients that come to me, they walk through my gate, they have no idea really what they're going to do, other than they know they're here to develop their leadership skills. And on paper, there's nothing sane and sensible about learning about your leadership and team skills from a horse. And of course, at the end of the day, everybody gets it. But when they first arrive, they are hugely out of their comfort zone. They're in an environment that they don't know and understand, and they're leading through uncertainty. So a lot of what I'm sharing with you today is based on my own corporate experience. It's based on my experience of working with horses. And it's also based on interviews with CEOs from all over the world, from small micro businesses locally to large global organizations. And the findings are pretty much in line with what I was experiencing with clients and what I'm going to share with you here today. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the context of uncertainty. Of course, the recent months with COVID-19 has given us a perfect opportunity to understand uncertainty better. But I'm going to talk about why uncertainty, how it gets created, and then I'm going to talk about some of the emotional responses to it. And some of these, many of them, you will recognize that you've had yourself, or you may certainly recognize them in your teams or in your families or your colleagues or your friends. And then I'm going to talk about what are the skills that will help us lead through uncertainty. And many of them you will have been doing in the last few months. And I want you to think about this in the context not just of COVID-19, but uncertainty in more general terms. So let's talk about the context of uncertainty. So these are some of the things that have generated uncertainty for us in the last few years. And if this chart feels rather overwhelming, well, then that's the context within which we're living and working today. So we've got massive political, economic and social instability globally. We are trying to embrace differences. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes we do it really badly. We are trying to embrace artificial intelligence, the same with that. The way that we live and work is changing, and there's a rapid pace of change driven largely by technology. So whenever there is change, there's uncertainty. Now, change itself is positive, it's healthy, and most of us thrive on it to a point. But what we're seeing and what we're experiencing at the moment is a high volume of change that creates uncertainty on top of uncertainty on top of uncertainty. And so what that means is that where we might normally cope with the uncertainty because it's just in one part of our lives, we're experiencing it on a global scale in a massive way, and therefore it's much more challenging for us at the moment. And so sometimes it's the volume of change that creates a level of uncertainty. The other thing that's interesting at the moment is that we have never before undergone this level of uncertainty on a global scale before in peacetime. So we have had, normally when you experience uncertainty, it might be a health problem, it might be that you've changed your job, but whenever you've created some change, there'll be other people around you who are more stable. So these are external influences that create uncertainty, but we also create our own uncertainty by the choices that we personally make. So for example, if you change your job, that creates uncertainty. If you move to a different country, or if you're in a country like the US and you move across the country to a different state, that creates some uncertainty because it means that your life is slightly different, the way that you live and work is going to be different, and there's uncertainty and there's a period of adjustment that needs to happen to that. Now, typically when we do that, your family and friends are not going through the same uncertainty when you change your job. Unless, of course, you change your job and move home at the same time, and then that increases the uncertainty. So one of the things that we've been experiencing in the last few months is that everybody's experiencing uncertainty. And so the foundations around us and the support structures around us have been less secure and less stable than they would normally. So that's the context within which we are living and working today. And I want you to think about this beyond COVID-19 and think about it in the context of where you are perhaps leading change, whether that's personal or professional change, or leading change in an organization, what impact is that having on the teams, the organization, the people around you, your clients, and so on? So these are some of the responses that we have, and in my book, I'll just show you a copy of that, Leading Through Uncertainty. In the book, there is a chapter on each one of these. Now, all of us, I would think that there's probably nobody listening today that's not been stressed at some point in the last 8 months with what's been going on, not just with COVID, but generally with what's going on in life and work. And that is a normal response to uncertainty, because our brains crave certainty, because certainty makes us feel safe. So we like the status quo to a point. We like the status quo because it creates a level of safety for us. And those things like driving to work on a daily basis, handling your emails, handling calls, the things that you do on a daily basis without thinking about it, that are in your comfort zone, mean that your stress levels are low when you're doing those things. But when there is uncertainty, our stress level will go up, because suddenly we're less safe, we're less secure. Because if we've not done something before, there's a question mark around, can we do it? Can we do it well? Is it the right thing to do? All of those questions will happen. So if you think about when, and I know in different countries, we've gone into lockdown in different ways, and there has been uncertainty around that in terms of which country is next, how are they handling it? And there's been stress around that as well, in terms of, are we handling it in the right way in the UK or in the US or France or Sweden or wherever people are? So levels of stress have increased. Now think about this to the backdrop of the slide earlier, where the context within which we're living and working is one where our stress levels are already pretty high. So when countries have gone into lockdown and when COVID-19 flared up, it sent some people into overwhelm. And the reason for that is that when our stress levels rise, what we need to be able to do naturally is to reduce them back to a more normal, stable level. And if we don't do that, then what happens is our stress goes up and up and up until we hit overwhelm. Once we're in overwhelm, we're no longer functioning effectively. So we don't think rationally, we will forget things, we might not sleep at night. All of those things will indicate that we're in overwhelm. And one of the phrases we hear a lot from people is, if I can just get to the end of this week, or if I can just get to the end of the month, or even the end of the year, everything will be okay, and then we'll be back to normal. And one of the things that I'm finding at the moment is that there is, not just with COVID-19, but there is no normal. There is no period of time. There's rarely a period of time when our stress level comes really low again. So one of the things we need to learn to do is to find ways to minimize our stress and keep bringing it back down, because uncertainty is going to create stress. So if you know you've got a period of uncertainty coming up, whether it's moving house, a new job, or leading change in the organization, you can expect to see an increase in stress in an organization whenever you lead change. And so, it's one of the things that we often don't factor into change. We think about it in terms of logistically, what do we need to do? What we also need to do is to look at, from an emotional well-being point of view and a mental well-being point of view, how do we make sure that an organization, our teams, our families are equipped to come with us on the journey of change. The other thing that uncertainty creates is fear and polarization. And the reason for that is because our brains crave certainty, we will look for gaps in information, and in uncertainty there are massive gaps in the information. So nobody yet knows how COVID-19 is going to end. We just don't know. Nobody yet knows which countries are doing it well. We might all have opinions on it, but we don't have hard data that is factually correct, and even the scientists can't agree on what the data is and what makes good data and what's not. And so what happens in the uncertainty is we get polarized opinions. And the reason for that is that where there are gaps in information, what we do is we fill those gaps with our opinions. So not fact, not hard data, but we fill it with opinions based on our values, our beliefs, our skills, and our experience. So in our own heads, we think it's fact. So what is an opinion and what is a judgment and an assumption, we start to behave as though it's true. And so some of the things that we will then start to see is this enormous polarization between, I'll give you an example of an easy example is face masks. There are some people that think you should not wear a face mask, and there are some people that think you absolutely should. And it doesn't matter which way you believe, the chances are you're not going to persuade the person who thinks the opposite to you. You're not going to persuade them that you're right and they're wrong, because they're also trying to persuade you that they are right and that you're wrong. And so what we get is this polarization in uncertainty. And with that, because we want certainty and because genuinely we want to live and work in harmony, and it's much easier when we all agree on everything. So what happens is our level of anxiety will go up because we've got differences of opinion. And what we need to be able to develop is the skills to help us through that polarization. Because the bad news is polarization is not going to go away when you've got uncertainty and when you've got change. And one of the things that I always say to teams is you actually want to encourage polarization, because if everybody is thinking the same way, then you haven't got diversity of thought. And there's a danger that you miss something important. You start to get groupthink. So polarization isn't a bad thing. It's actually quite healthy. It's how we manage it that is going to be really important. And then the last section in the book on this is called pain and trauma. And one of my beta readers said, "Why have you got a chapter on pain and trauma in a leadership book?" And my answer to that was, "Well, have you ever had a painful experience at work?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I had a manager who micromanaged me, and it was a disaster. And I realized I never wanted to work for somebody like that again." And that's why there's a chapter on pain and trauma, because what happens when there's uncertainty is there will be things that become overwhelming and things that are difficult. And our past experiences will influence how we show up with those things. So one of the things that I've been finding in working with clients over the last few months is that some people have coped really well with the lockdown situation, and some people have coped really badly with it. And there's no right or wrong with this, because it's a case of, if your stress level was already up here, it could be the thing that flipped you into overwhelm. The other thing is that if you've had experiences in the past that trigger you, those experiences will trigger you again. So for example, for me, I have a really strong value around freedom. So as soon as somebody starts to tell me what I can't do and what I must do, I really feel triggered by that. And so I have to manage my stress level around accepting the guidelines and the rules that we're being given, knowing that they're being given to us for a reason. But it takes energy to do that. And so that's why there's a chapter on this, because whenever you see people in your team, or maybe even in your family, behaving in a way that is surprising whenever there is a change of some sort, then just know that it's because the uncertainty is triggering that response for people. What we tend to do when we see that is we try and shut it down and we make it wrong. And what we actually need to be able to do is to handle it and to be more curious around it and look at how we can support people through it. So one of the things that I found when I talked to CEOs about uncertainty was almost all of them, their parting words to me were, "We just have to remember to be human." And that when there is uncertainty, effectively what we're doing is we're carving a path that hasn't been done before. And if we're doing that, then there's no right or wrong way of doing it. And it's only in hindsight that we have all of the information and the answers, and sometimes not even then. And so one of the things they talked about was, how do we be more human in the workplace? And I don't know why that surprised me, but it did surprise me that, you know, even CEOs of large global organizations were talking in those terms. And these are the 8 things that were common to pretty much everybody that I interviewed. And some of the language surprised me, although it might have been language I might have used. it surprised me that I was hearing it from everybody I was talking to. And the first thing that people talked about was creating the framework. Now, when people walk through my gate, they come for a leadership experience, and they literally stand in a field of uncertainty with a herd of horses, not knowing what they're going to do, not knowing if the horses will engage with them. And so it's uncomfortable. There's an awful lot at stake when you stand in front of your peers, wondering whether the horse will engage with you and come with you. And what often happens is that people will focus on the bits of information that are uncertain. And this is really common in uncertainty. And we've seen that in the last few months, where people are constantly seeking answers where there might not be answers yet. So for example, when somebody walks through my gate, if I were to hand them a piece of rope, just a piece of rope, as long as they had the physical dexterity to hold that piece of rope, they would take that rope from my hand without thinking about it. But if I put a 600-kilogram horse in a head collar on the end of that lead rope, it changes everything, for some people and maybe not for others. Now, the way that you get a horse to come with you is the way that you lead a person. So everybody knows how to walk, or if they're in a wheelchair, they know how to wheel their wheelchair. And all of us at some point we've built relationships, so we know how to build a relationship. All of us will be able to hold a piece of rope in some way, whether it's with a hand or some other form. We will be able to manage that. And those are the basics of technically how you lead a horse. What a horse needs from a leader is the same as a person, which is, are you clear where you're going? And is there a strong relationship based on trust and respect? And that is it. And yet what happens is, the moment that people take that lead rope from me, they start to question, how fast do I walk? Where do I stand? Will the horse come with me? How do I build a relationship? Should I talk to the horse? All of these are questions that my answer to those is, I don't know. Because I don't know how any of you lead. I know how I lead. I know how fast I walk, but I don't know how fast somebody who's just walked through my gate walks normally. I don't know how you build a relationship. I know how I do it. And so what happens is people start to focus on the things that they don't know. And then doubt starts to creep in, and they start to question, is the horse going to come with me or not? Am I going to look silly in front of my peers? Am I going to fail? And of course, while we put all of our attention on the unknowns, that's when the doubt creeps in, and that's when we start to struggle. So one of the things in all of the interviews that I had with the CEOs, they all talked about, we need to create a framework in uncertainty. And what that means is, be clear about what's known and be clear about what's not known. A CEO that I'm working with at the moment has recently communicated she's got some massive change going on in her organisation, and she can't share all of it even with the senior team. But what she has said is, yes, there is change going on, and I promise you that as soon as I can share it, I will share it widely. And what that does is that generates a level of trust, because the organisation know that she's not trying to withhold information, that she's going to share it when she can. And so that's what creating the framework means. And part of that is about being clear about what's not known. So, if you look at the pandemic, there's an awful lot that is still not known. And if we're honest about not knowing it, then it gives people reassurance that we're not withholding information. If we pretend that we don't know something when we do, then trust starts to get eroded. So creating the framework is about providing that clarity on what's known and what's not. And keep reassuring people around, remember this is what's known, keep focusing on that. The other thing that we have to do in uncertainty is we have to be much more aware. There's a tendency that if we get stuck in on a job and we focus on that, or on a relationship, we get stuck in it and we forget to look up and look at the wider picture. So one of the things that I'm seeing at the moment with organizations is the ones who are managing well, or the ones who are talking to their clients, they're seeing what's happening in the marketplace, they're looking at what might be the assumptions, they're testing them, and they're really sensing into what's happening in the wider field, and how do we shape what we do next? How do we redefine our strategy based on what our customers need today and based on what our customers need in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And what this requires us to do is to actually take a step back and pay attention to what's happening. And we need to do this on both a micro and a macro level. So not only do we need to co-sense and co-shape with what's happening in the wider market, but we need to do that in our teams as well. And it's much harder when we're remote working. But one of the things we need to be paying attention to is who in the team is struggling. And it might be different this week from what it was a month ago, and it might be different again in a month's time. So constantly paying attention to what's needed and how do we then co-create from that. The other thing that is needed now is more listening and dialogue. And I'll be honest, as as leaders, we are terrible at this. What we tend to do is we listen for information that is important to us, and we drop all of the rest. And actually, if you think about when you've got this polarization where you've got people either clashing or moving away from each other, what we really need to do is seek to understand. And we don't do that by trying to persuade. Because if we're trying to persuade someone with a polarized opinion, what we're doing is we're listening for where we think we're right and can persuade them that they're wrong. And we're always looking to topple over. What we actually need to be doing is saying, how do we walk in partnership through this, even if we have completely different views of how it should be done? So true listening and true dialogue comes when we start to have conversation where we really start to understand each other. We start to understand what's being said beyond the words. So understanding the values, the beliefs, the experience that other people are bringing, and really being curious about where somebody's got a different perspective to us. Because if somebody has a different perspective to you, there's a reason for it. It's rarely because somebody gets out of bed in the morning thinking, I'm going to be the difficult person in the team today. It's always because there's something that they know or that they've experienced previously that you've not got either in your experience or in your understanding. So whenever we don't understand, or wherever there's conflict or polarization, this is where we need to start. And it's often the very last thing that we do. What this can do is, it doesn't need to persuade people to agree. We can still agree to disagree, but we can hopefully bring people together and create a level of connection through our differences, knowing that we're trying to understand, but knowing that we see the world differently. And this is what we're trying to create. Now, if I look at this picture, let me just explain. So this is my herd of horses, and this is half of an executive team of a company I worked with. On the left-hand side is Callie, and she's the leader of this herd. She's the most opinionated in this team, and she walks the slowest. So she's very solid, she's very methodical, she can do a flat-out gallop when she wants to, but if you're just going from A to B and there's no need to rush, she doesn't rush. So she takes things very steadily. Next to her is a horse called Tiffin. He's an ex-race horse. So his pace is off like a rocket. His walking pace, he's got these massive strides. So if you've ever seen horses at the races where they're bouncing next to somebody, that is the way that Tiffin can quite easily walk, because he has this massive stride and he likes to walk really fast. If you want to keep up with him, you'll have to run to keep up with his walking pace. If you start to run, he will break into a run and then it escalates. So the only way to walk with him is to slow his pace down. And you've probably all met somebody, that you work with whose pace you need to slow down at times. And you've probably met somebody like Callie who you need to actually increase the pace. So you can already see with two horses, trying to keep those two together, if you lead one in each hand, you end up being dragged by one and pulled back by the other. And that, of course, is what happens in our teams as well. Now, the next in line is Mr. Blue, the grey horse, and you'll notice that he's looking at the camera, and the person handling his lead rope is also looking at the camera. And Mr. Blue is the class clown in the team. So he's the one that likes to muck about. He's always being silly. He'll steal hats off people's heads in winter. He'll try and pick your feet up. He loves to distract and play around. He brings a lot of energy. He brings great fun. So when there's conflict, he can generate lightness of spirit, but he can also derail a team like you wouldn't believe. And again, you've probably all got somebody in your team, or maybe you are the person in the team that brings Mr. Blue's fun energy. And then in the last one in line is Geo, and he is a people pleaser. And what he likes to do is do as he's told. Now, the challenge for him in a team is he doesn't know who to listen to, because he wants to listen to his own horse handler. So he's doing as he's told there, but he also wants to listen to everybody else because he likes the team to work in harmony and to be completely in agreement all of the time. So the world can be quite confusing for him. So when there are polarized views in this team, as there often are, he will often sit back and wait because he feels quite confused. There you've got a team of 4 horses with vastly different personalities. And by the way, this exec team also have vastly different personalities. But the thing that is keeping all of them together is connection. And it's a desire to stay connected no matter what. So even though Mr. Blue is focused on the camera, his horse handler has focused his attention there, but is also focusing his attention on the other people. Although he's looking at the camera, his attention and his connection is sideways on as well. This is the challenge that we need to create in uncertainty, where we've got different points of view, different styles, different ways of communicating, different ways of leading, is how do we stay connected? And it's by constantly checking in with each other and constantly refining our own style, so that we're slowing Tiffin down and we're increasing Callie's pace and we're keeping Blue away from the distraction, and we're helping Geo feel comfortable in a team that's all going at slightly different pace. This is the challenge, that whenever you're leading a team, this is what we're experiencing. And it's connection and support that brings us back to stability. Now, one of the ways that we do that is through trust. Now, it's probably not a surprise to you to know that there's a chapter on building trust in the leadership book. But in the book, what I focus on specifically is, why do we need to build trust in uncertainty, and why does it get eroded? And it gets eroded as a result of polarization. Because what happens when we have polarized views is, what we tend to do is we gravitate towards the people who think like us, look like us, behave like us, agree with us, and we move away from the people who don't. So in a team, it's quite common for people to test their ideas out on the people that they think will agree with them first, because it feels more comfortable to do that. But what we do by doing that is we start to erode trust with the ones who naturally have different opinions from us. What then happens is we start to disconnect slowly. And this can happen slowly over time, or it can happen in an instant. But if we're not engaging at the same level with the people who we're polarized with, or who are disengaged, or who are making assumptions up about us, then we can start to erode trust and we can break down relationships really quickly. And so in polarization, what we need to do is trust that even though we have a vastly different opinion and a vastly different experience, we're safe. To trust that you are safe, that it's okay to have those conversations, that nobody's going to get physically hurt, hopefully, in the office as a result of you having a difficult conversation. But pay attention to how easy it is to withdraw when the conversations get tricky, because what we tend to do is we disconnect, and in the process of that, we erode trust. Now, if we use trust as a starting point, and we trust that we're okay, we trust that that person wants the best for us and for the organization and the team, and we're all coming from that same place, that's the foundation that we can build on. This is the one that I dislike the most, really, in uncertainty. I said I thrive on uncertainty, except when I don't. And we all have moments when we thrive on it and moments when we don't. But one of the things that happens in uncertainty is, when it gets uncomfortable, what we want to do is we withdraw. And there are lots of ways that we do that. One way might be, if you've ever sat in a boring meeting, and I'm sure most of you have at some point, but if you've ever sat in a boring meeting, then at some point you've probably picked up your mobile phone and distracted yourself because you're bored. Or if a discussion's going round and round and you're sick of hearing about it, you might distract yourself. That is a way of disengaging from uncertainty when it gets uncomfortable. And so I often say that our mobile phones are the adult modern day equivalent of a comfort blanket, because we go to our mobile phones to distract and disengage because it makes us feel comfortable. Because I guarantee there'll be something in your email, or there'll be a voicemail or a message, there'll be something on your phone that you can engage with that's really easy, that brings your stress level down. And so that's what we tend to do when it gets uncomfortable. Now, it's okay if we distract ourselves and disengage, because what we need to be able to do is, if we feel ourselves going into overwhelm, remember I said we need to bring our stress levels down. So distraction and disengaging is normal and is okay, as long as then we don't just disappear and break the trust and break the connection with the team. So one of the things we need to be able to do is to bring ourselves back. So bring the stress level down and then re-engage and bring yourself back. And when you're leading a team, one of the things that we need to do is to look at who in the team is disengaged. Do they need some space to bring their stress level down? Or are they disengaged because they're polarized with everybody else, or they're representing a different perspective? And so we need to be able to use all the skills we've used before. So sensing into who in the team is disengaged, who's got distracted, how do we reconnect them? When do we allow them to bring their stress level down by disengaging? And when do we bring them back? And how do we create a space where it's safe for people to have that open dialogue and to know that they're going to be heard in that polarized view? And I always say resistance is a desire for safety, and we'll always get resistance whenever there is change and uncertainty. There'll always be people who feel uncomfortable with it, and so they will be the voice of resistance, because they're seeing things that you might not have seen, or they're concerned about their safety, or maybe, back to creating the framework, they're focusing on what's not known and what's not clear, and they need to be re-engaged and refocused on what is known and what is clear and what's certain within the framework. So there's lots of ways that we can support ourselves and each other and our teams with staying with the discomfort of it. But it's also important to know that sometimes we do need to disengage and give ourselves some time out. And this is what it ultimately boils down to. And this is one of the things that I think everybody I interviewed said towards the end. They summed it up by saying, we just have to remember that we're human, that when there is change, there's uncertainty. When there's uncertainty, there will be trial and error, because by its very nature, we've not done it before. And if we haven't done it before, there will be trial and error. And by that, that means there will be error. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in the last few months in talking to clients is that many of them are very comfortable having empathy and compassion for people in their team who've made mistakes or struggled or needed some time out, but they haven't given themselves the same credibility or the same ability to be human in this process. And so part of being human is having compassion and empathy for, when there's uncertainty, there will be struggle and there'll be challenges, there'll be stress and overwhelm, fear and polarization, that we need to recognize all of that is part of what it means to be human, and that we need to create space for us to be human, not just for our teams, but for ourselves as well. And give yourselves a break, really, is what this is all about. And the other thing that they talked about was leading from your heart and soul. And this was a phrase that I might have used before, but I was surprised to hear a lot of CEOs use this. And a lot of them talked about, when there's uncertainty, there's always doubt. There's always doubt around, am I doing the right thing for the organization? Am I doing the right thing for the people? Am I doing the right thing for the customers? And so there is always going to be a level of self-doubt. And part of what we need to be able to do is to make decisions, make them wholeheartedly from your heart and soul, and trust that if you're doing all of the other things, that you're sensing into what the response is, that if you make a mistake, that you catch it early, you recover quickly, and then you take the next step. What often happens in uncertainty is people get stuck in this analysis paralysis or this anxiety of, am I doing it right? Lying awake at night, worrying about health and safety procedures that have changed, new legislation. Am I doing the right thing for my team? Is this person okay? What do I do for that person? How do I help this client? All of those are things that we will question in uncertainty. All we can do is lead wholeheartedly and decisively. And when we do that, to know that again, we will make mistakes, that we can recover quickly, and then we can try again. And that's what we mean by leading from your heart and soul. I will leave you, before we open up to questions, I'll leave you with this quote by Margaret Wheatley, and it's from a very tiny little book called Perseverance, which is an excellent book, which really doesn't have any answers but asks a lot of questions. And I often think that that's more powerful for us to ask more questions and to work our own way through challenges like this. But I love what this quote does for me, is it gives me hope that no matter whether it's a great situation or whether it's really challenging, we will find our way through it. And we've proved that in the last 7 or 8 months with COVID-19. I know when the UK went into lockdown in March, and really there was a real sense of panic and anxiety and stress and grief and loss as well. Lots of people were questioning, how on earth are we going to lead our way through this? And here we are, eight months on, and we're doing it. You know, you've done it, we're all doing it. And it might not look the way we want it to look. We don't know what the future holds for any of us, but we're doing it. And I think that is the thing that gives me hope, is to know that no matter what happens, what it is to be human is to find our way through it. And if we can trust in our ability to lead through almost any situation, then we know that it's workable. And what that does for me, it gives me enormous strength and resilience to know that if every situation is workable, then really that stress level can come right down, because it comes from a solid base of knowing that everything will be okay no matter what happens. So I've shared lots of information with you there. It's a quick whiz tour through leading through uncertainty. There is lots more in my book, which is available from my website and all good bookshops. On my website, if you go to leadwithjude.com, you can download a report that gives you 9 top tips to lead through uncertainty, and it gives you a summary of some of the information that I've shared. So if this has been useful for you, feel free to download that report and share it with your teams and your clients and your organization, because lots of people have said that they found that enormously helpful. Those are my contact details. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Drop me an email, call me up. If you've got questions, you want to have a chat about uncertainty or any of the things I've talked about, then please just get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. So I will hand back to Andrea and open up for questions.
Yes, thank you so much. This was really interesting. I really enjoyed it, and I feel that everybody agrees with me. I just want to remind all the attendees that this is the time for questions. I won't be able to allow you to speak, so please type your questions down on the Q&A box that you find at the right side of your screen. I will read them out loud so that Jude can answer them. I have already one that is really interesting, Jude. You mentioned that when people are disagreeing, you should try to listen to them because most likely they will lead you to something, right? how can you differentiate between the people that are, really saying something and the people who are just problematic? How and how
Yeah.
you can just, lead with the problematic people?
Yeah, great question. And my answer to that is the people that are problematic, also there's a reason for why they're being problematic. So there's always a reason for why somebody will be the difficult person in the team. And often it's because they see the world differently, or they have a different perspective on things. So for example, when I worked for IBM, because I wasn't technical, if I sat in meetings with technical people, I would often have a very different view and I would ask very different questions. And I was often the problematic person, not because I got out of bed wanting to be difficult, but because I saw a different perspective that people who were deeply technical didn't see. And so whenever you've got problematic people in the team, there's always a reason for it. Even when you think there might not be, there always is. I managed a chap who was an IBM fellow, which is appointed to somebody who is at the highest level of their technical expertise. And he was known for being really difficult. And the reason why he was difficult was he had the brain the size of a planet. Nobody understood him most of the time. And he really struggled to get across his point of view. And everybody just made assumptions about him being difficult, about him being technical and having no personal skills. But nobody ever asked him what he wanted. And when he worked for me and people warned me he was going to be difficult, the first thing I did was I sat him down and I said, what do you want from me as a leader? And what do you want from the organization? And what do you need from me to support you? And he looked at me and he said, nobody's ever asked me that before, and I don't know what the answer is. So sometimes with a problematic person, they're being difficult, but they don't know why. So part of it is to ask them, what do they need, and get them to go away and think about that and reflect on it. But there's always a reason. So lots of curiosity, lots of probing, lots of coaching questions is the way to really dig deep and really come from a place of not trying to change them, but just trying to understand.
Got it. Thank you. Another question. Could you provide a few tips and also examples of how a leader can use vulnerability, as you mentioned, as a strategy to build trust with their team without losing credibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think uncertainty is a great opportunity to demonstrate vulnerability as a strength rather than vulnerability as a weakness. And the difference to me is vulnerability as a strength is where you are open-hearted and clear about what you don't know. So I think it's okay. In fact, I think it's needed in uncertainty to say, I don't know the answer to this. Let's work together to resolve this. And I promise you, if I get further insights, I will tell you. That's vulnerable. That's vulnerable to say, I'm open, I don't know the answers. But it's also an enormous strength, because that is far stronger as a position than pretending you know answers when you don't. So I think uncertainty gives us lots of opportunity to really be curious. And listening and dialogue requires huge vulnerability. It requires vulnerability to again say, I may not have all the answers, and I may not have led you in the way that you wanted to be led. So tell me what you need from me. That's vulnerable, but a massively strong position to hold.
Awesome. Um, I would like to remind everybody that we still have a few minutes, so please send your questions fast. I have another one here. You mentioned that you need to be curious and that you need to try to understand the values and the beliefs of, the people you lead. And it seems that it's great that you can work with horses and use them to understand that a little bit more from, the people you work with. But in case you don't have that opportunity, how can leaders listening here now, use a certain tips or examples of I don't know, questions or strategies that they can really put in place to understand the values and beliefs of their team?
I think it starts with an open conversation. And I think one of the things that we've done really well in the last few months, certainly the organizations I've been speaking to have done really well, is to listen, to ask, to say, how are you doing? One of the things I've noticed is that we've seen each other's bedrooms, living rooms. Today I'm in my office up at my stables. We're seeing each other in different environments, and there's an opportunity there to say, oh, okay, so where are you today, and what's going on around you, and oh, I didn't know you had a dog, when you hear the dog barking. Those are opportunities to really start to get to know each other and see each other as human beings. And often when we're leading fast-paced change, we can push through all of that. And I think the last few months have shown us the importance of building that rapport by creating those conversations.
And do you think all these, you know, recommendations apply to the personal life as well, to families, for example, experiencing change or grief, or any personal challenge right now at this time? Which do you think are the most important to also apply to your personal life?
Well, I want to say all of them because they all really build on each other. I think wherever there is uncertainty, a really great starting point is to create that framework, to really start to look at what can I focus on that is known, that is understood, that helps me feel comfortable and helps me feel like everything isn't all chaotic. Because there's so much, no matter what's going on in your, whether it's personal or working life, there is so much that's still stable. And what we tend to focus on is what's not stable. So if you focus on what's stable, it just starts to bring the stress level down. I think that's such a great place to start.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jude. I think we're done with the questions. I'm not receiving anything else. I would like to remind everybody that this webinar has been recorded. So if you joined a little bit late, don't worry. You can always go back to it. I will 100% recommend to watch it again. I will do it myself, and I will share with as many people I know, because this was really, really interesting and enlightening. I hope everybody felt the same way. Jude, thank you so much. This webinar is going to be on our YouTube channel. So if you don't follow us, please look for We Connect International on YouTube, and you will find all the previous sessions that we have had in the We Connect Academy. Do you have any last message to share with us today?
No, just thank you, Andrea, for hosting and managing this session, and thank you everybody for joining, and keep leading.
Thank you so much, and congratulations for this amazing work you do. I believe that it should be very, very fun. It seems beautiful, so congratulations for that. And remember that you have a group of people who support your work, and all the leaders out there, remember that in We Connect you have a pal to ask questions and to just ask for support. So I think I have one last thing, and now you're just receiving a lot of thank yous. So thank you, Jude, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.